Well, we have an interesting subject this morning, but it is one which has been considered, reconsidered, denied, and affirmed over periods of thousands of years. Apparently, we are all confronted with the mystery of solving more or less completely the major issues of life. We have not gotten very far in that procedure up to the present time. We have found many answers, but not the answer to the major issues of existence. Sir Edwin Arnold, in his poem The Light of Asia, makes the Buddha to say, "Veil upon veil we lift, but find veil upon veil behind." And this is more or less the situation as it is. Every solution that we find proves to require in its own turn another solution. And so the problem goes on, and we are all trying to find the essential answers to the problems of daily existence. Now, the human being is endowed with three basic powers of thoughtfulness and examination. He has the mystery of the heart, which is more or less the mystery of religion. He has the mystery of the mind, which is largely fulfilled by philosophy and learning. And he has the mystery of the hand, which is in the keeping of science. With his hands, his mind, and his heart, he must build his own way in a very mysterious universe. Actually, as we go along, we hear a great many different opinions today about some of these issues. But still we must face the fact that we must find some basic convictions. We must get things down to their roots, dispose in one way or another of the many layers of fallacies and theories and conflicts which have built up in every level of our education and our spiritual culture. We see, for example, that today our religious world is in a very bad condition. All over the world, members of religions are fighting their own members, and also the members of all other religions. We find that instead of the religion of love, which was brought to us by the great world teachers, we have a theology of conflicts. We have a series of, we'll say, misunderstandings, which are built up to massive proportions. Every day now, some small group finds a reason to hate some other small group, and the large groups hate the small ones, and it goes on in a great problem of conflict for control, for domination, for possession of the life of the individual. In our religious life, our conflicts go back to a very basic point. What is religion? Is religion one of the many conflicting creeds, or is religion a totality in itself? Is religion a basis upon which to build a life? Are all these various religions merely translations and interpretations of one eternal faith? If that is true and there is a basic religion, what is it? How can we escape the conflict of sectarianisms and persecutions and inquisitions if we are in the presence of a faith, the purpose of which is to make our lives better and bring us closer to an ideal way of existence? What is the problem of these religions? Why can they not get together? Why are the creeds more important than conduct? Why is it more important to argue over the translation of a book than it is to understand or read the book itself? Day after day, year after year, the homely and common truths of things have been reinterpreted, reanalyzed, The search for older source material goes on and on and on. But the religious world, 4/5 at least of the human race, is in pitiful condition. It has come to the point where the faiths that were given to us to preserve our inner lives are now almost on the verge of destroying us. Everywhere the truths are ignored. What is religion? Is religion something that has to be creedalized? Does it have to be a sectarian approach to spiritual understanding? Can we not recognize the final, ultimate basis of religion? And that is, love ye one another. Now, all the theology in the world cannot destroy that or create a peaceful existence without it. The real contribution of religion is love. Love, fellowship, service, mutual consideration, compassion for all that lives. It is the purpose of religion to bring people together. But by various contrivances, we have so integrated or organized our faiths that they live in constant antagonism with each other. And on what grounds are these antagonisms? Well, primarily on the assumption, which is held throughout the world, that each individual or each community or each communion of religion, each one is the only true one. No matter how much you try to interpret or understand these facts, the fact remains, as my old doctor friend said, there are only two doxies in this world. Orthodoxy, which is my religion, heterodoxy, which is everybody else's. So this becomes a loyalty not to truth, but a loyalty to an institution. Even if we understand this institution historically, we must admit that there are areas of it which are not worthy of loyalty. But we go right on, convinced and concerned only with the victory of our own belief over everyone else's. This is not love. Love suffereth long and is kind. Love forgives. Love strives in every way possible to make things happier and better for even the stranger outside the gate. But we have not recognized the primary purpose of religion. Love is religion, and hate is atheism. Hate is a danger to all that lives. It is arousing the selfishness, the competitiveness in the human personality for the destruction of mankind. The only answer is to recognize that religion has one basic fact: love ye one another. Now, you don't have to hang a name on that. It has been known everywhere. Akhenaton taught it in Egypt 1,200 years before the birth of Christ. It is in every code that man has ever had, namely, that each one shall think not of his own good alone, but of the good of all. Democracy as a policy is based upon cooperation, mutual union for common good. And all these things have gradually faded away. Now, philosophy also has its part in the entire study of things. Philosophy is a very interesting problem. Here we have a human being standing in a desert, the desert of waiting. He has been standing there for ages, with the sky above him, earth under his feet, the sun glaring down, and occasionally a flood endangering his life. This individual standing on that spot of ground, or if we want to enlarge it, this little planet which we call the Earth, tries desperately to understand why he is here.
Because a woman is...
What is he here to do? Where did he come from? Where is he going? What should he be doing that he isn't doing? And what should he stop doing that he is doing? Somehow out of this situation, the individual must integrate a code of personal conduct. And this is basically called philosophy. Philosophy is nothing but organized, carefully thought out common sense. Now, the man standing in the desert, or each of us standing where we are, our philosophy is not and cannot be absolute. We do not know more than we can understand. We do not understand more than we are. But all the way along, there have been provisions made to help the individual to improve his own conduct, to increase his own skills, and protect himself from the natural dangers of life, and to build towards some kind of a future. There is a maturity for mankind. But philosophy today is not much concerned with these problems. It is a series of intellectual squabbles. It is what Voltaire calls learned people throwing three-legged stools at each other's heads. We are not really concerned. A new book comes out to refute an old one. Someone decides a new way of thinking about something, probably never has applied it to himself, but is giving it to the whole world as a new solution to an eternal problem. With all the solutions, the problem goes on. Every time we explore a little deeper, we find a greater need for insights and understanding. And these facilities are not always available. The purpose of philosophy in its basic rule is ethical. How we can live with each other and survive. How we can face the problems of each other. How we can overcome the antagonisms of each other. And how we can build an intellectual cooperative in this strange, mysterious world where everything seems to be organized except humanity. So we try to find some basis for thinking. We know it is not going to be eternal, it's not going to be inevitable. But it must be enough so that we can get together and work out our problems in peace. It must be that the mind and the brain have been given us to use, not to abuse. And the use means that we must apply every faculty that we have to the improvement of our lives and the expansion of our relationships with the universe in which we live. Therefore, out of thinking comes philosophy. And the great philosophical systems of the world are not wrong. Most of them have been developed for a people in a place at a time. But even this does not mean they are not enduringly significant. 50 philosophies of life in the world in its great unfoldment have had the golden rule, almost word for word. Nearly every philosophy worth following has tried to give the individual the stamina to grow constructively without destroying others who are also trying to grow constructively. Therefore, philosophy is a harmonizer of beliefs. It is a means by which the individual uses every mental resource at his disposal to make more secure his own relationship with life. Philosophy must improve that part of him which is inside of himself, and which must necessarily come in contact with the consequences of the inside consciousness of other people. So down underneath all of everything, whereas religion gave us love, philosophy gives us ethics. Ethics is a standard of relationship. It is that which proves beyond any question of doubt that that which injures one injures all, and that whereas we use our wisdom to exploit each other, we are also digging our own graves. Ethics becomes a basis of all values. Ethics in business, ethics in science, ethics in advertising, entertainment, amusement, education. All these institutions must be ethically maintained, or else the problem will be lost for all. So the mind gives us the right to be honorable, to be honest, not because of the fear of God, but because that we have a proper religious admiration and love for all other things and must protect them. So we have in philosophy a protection of rights, a perpetuation of values, and we also have a rationalization, a study by which we are able to divide the knowable from the unknowable, and to finally come to the realization that the unknowable is still the ruler of all things. Now, when it comes to science, we have the human hand. We have that part of the individual which is concerned with the physical world in which he lives. In the physical world, he must establish the securities that he needs for his survival and for the advancement of his kind. In other words, the hand is labor. It is definitely science, for the end of science is to protect the life of the human being. But after all, science has had a very spotted background. The sciences as we know them today are comparatively recent, and the scientific objectives which we cherish today are not always consistent with our needs. I think the great problem that we have with science is that it remains and has always been more or less unscientific. It talks about science, but a science that ignores the problem of human life and tries to explore the heavens has missed something. It has missed the urgency of applying skill to the immediate need of living things. Now, there are some areas in which science has made very valuable contributions, but the whole theory of science seems to be based upon the assumption that out there everything is mystery. And in order to be able to do the ordinary jobs of living, we must solve this mystery, this abstract, this absolute. We must try to discover, if we can, the eternal cause of existence. Well, as far as that's concerned, science has more or less given up. It realizes that apparently the very truth most necessary to it is unavailable. That no matter how far we go through galaxies and dark holes and all the mathematical calculations that we have, the great reality evades us. These calculations are magnificent. They reveal strange and wonderful things. And to young people starting out in life, they are the source of a great enthusiasm, a great hope, a tremendous excitement. But when it is all said and done, the old Persian poet summed up it all with a simple statement: man is born, man suffers, and man dies. Somewhere in this vastness of science, we are overlooking the immediacy of the need of practical answers to living problems. That instead of worrying continuously about the advancement across the frontiers of the unknown, we have a problem in our own backyard that is in desperate need of scientific skills. Because in the end, from the standpoint of science, the search is still for truth. But in this case, the truth of utility, how to use the things we have to the best good of all concerned. The greatest contribution of science must also be responsibility. A scientist should never invent or discover or circulate or propaganda anything which he cannot control. He should not be able to create weapons that will destroy him. He should not be able to make discoveries which lead to unemployment, to sickness and death, because they are inconsistent with the ethics of living. So science has the practical job, not of relieving everyone of work, but of finding work for everyone. Constructive labor. All labor-saving devices endanger the economy of mankind. Yet today we feel these to be necessary. Why? Because we have departed from the roots and foundations of our forebears. And to make this sound reasonable, and to make our feelings less hurt or less endangered, we take it for granted and promulgate the idea that the old things were not very much good. Antiquity was nice while you were in antiquity, but now we've outgrown it. We've outgrown Socrates, we have outgrown Buddha, we have outgrown all of these. We have even outgrown our own Christianity. These things were for little people growing up. But great, big, strong people like today do not need anything like that. All they need is to build a weapon big enough to prevent themselves from being destroyed, but in the process probably inventing something that will destroy the very world they are trying to save. So we have now a great argument against ethics, against morality, and against religion because they are old-fashioned. Well, what is old-fashioned? Old-fashioned, we might say, can best be detected or discovered by a study of what happens and how things came into existence that are important to us. One of the oldest codes of ethics and morality the world has known was the Code of Hammurabi, king of Babylonia. This code was brought into existence 1800 BC. Now that's a long time back. That would be very easy to outgrow, we would think. We ought to be a long way from Babylonia. The country is gone, but the code lingers on. Well, what does the code say? The code says that if you cheat your neighbor, you're going to be punished for it. If you build a house and shoddy the goods and materials and it falls down, you build another one without charge, or else you go to jail. If you steal, you are punished. If you perform good labors, you are honored. You're expected to honor your parents, you're expected to honor society and keep the rules of society, protect and raise your children properly, and live a good, solid, serious life without too much alcohol. Now, this is what they believed 1,800 years before the beginning of the Christian era. Well, you can see from the very statement that it was very impractical. It was against all of the best rules of competition. It would prevent miscellaneous characters from gradually controlling the world by finance alone, and defending the finance with heavy artillery and bombs. Oh, that is so ancient. We have outgrown things like that. We have outgrown the dignity of the home. We have outgrown the dignity of the respect for parents. We have outgrown the love of labor and the realization that God likes people who work. Now God rewards people for not working. All this was very prehistoric. You couldn't possibly tell the individual today who has just come out of Yale or Harvard that the old code has immediate and vital meaning. Well, a while after that came along one of the greatest thinkers of antiquity, Akhenaten, king of Egypt. The Pharaoh, who was the first, long ago, to say that all living peoples, all creatures in fact, were created free and equal. That every individual, regardless of his station, is worthy of respect. He is to be respected for what he does and for what he is and not for what he has. And that's real heresy. You have realized that that's totally unreasonable. We must respect people who have large bank accounts. We must allow those with the greatest means to be the ideals that we struggle to emulate. It was Akhenaten also who was the first patron of women's suffrage. And when he married Nefertiti, and they sat together on the throne of Egypt,
Nefertiti,
he would refer to her, my queen, who is myself. No break, no interval, equal in every respect. He also was one of those who brought out the rather simple idea that was too fast for its own time, that war was a mistake, that you did not fight, that war will never produce peace. He knew that, and for that he died. Died as a young man, either of a broken heart or by poison, according to what account you read, because the country wanted war, profit. It wanted to break down the idea of equalities and enslave humanity. Now, about the same time as Akhenaten was flourishing in Egypt for a while, Moses received the tablets of the law from the peaks of Sinai. And the Ten Commandments, or the Decalogue, is about 3,000 years, maybe a little more than 3,000 years old, obviously extinct. We don't have those kind of things anymore. Honor thy father and thy mother. Interferes with the profit system. Be good to the stranger. Take in the helpless and the homeless and feed them. Oh no, not now. And Moses didn't have any social security to back him up either. Right? Moses said, thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not bear false witness. All these things. But that was 3,000 or more years ago. And they tell us now that we shouldn't pay attention to those kind of things. We've outgrown them. And we've outgrown them so far and so fast that we are in desperate condition from the pressures that we put upon our own personalities. The first Christian code was that of Justinian. And it added to the other factors, elements, certain graces of the Spirit, certain new dimensions of human idealism. It made the New Testament, particularly the Sermon on the Mount, a basis of legal construction. You could build a code upon it that could be properly applied and enforced. This also was quite a long time ago. But every code that has come along since that time has been a little worse. Day by day, the codes go down instead of the people rising. And in order to govern people today, you have to apparently excuse all their limitations, forgive all their misdemeanors, and tell them that they live in a free enterprise system. Now this seems to interfere with the idea of a universe that has something ruling it beside the individual. Now here we can go back to another earlier period of time before people wrote codes. These earlier times are still represented by primitive peoples or the traditions that they have left behind. One of the most common codes of antiquity was that the only way that the individual at this time can come to any understanding of right and wrong is by observing life around him. Nature is his best teacher. Nature tells him what he can do and what he cannot do. And in the ancient times, primitive peoples obeyed nature. In our modern and far more advanced culture, we do everything possible to evade and avoid natural law. We do not want natural law to hold control. We know what happens, but we don't care. We know that natural law is not in favor of cocaine, but it's used. We know that natural law is not in favor of destroying the lives and securities of other people, but we do it. Little by little, we have created a new attitude, an amoral attitude toward existence. We have rejected all of the footings that we have ever discovered, and in the place of them, create a code of complete individual prerogatives. Do as you please. Well, that would be maybe a little more excusable if we did something that was pleasing, but we don't. And we find ourselves little by little bringing down all of the principles that once inspired us and making them servants to our ambitions. We make virtues out of our vices instead of trying to correct them. Yet we live in a universe which we must face sometime. We haven't solved it. We have not been able to bribe the infinite. We have not been able to place one of our own kind on the throne of heaven. We do not know how to administer ourselves, but all-wise providence has also given us such limitations that there are only certain mistakes that we can make. If we knew of more, we would make them also, but fortunately we don't know all of them. But here is a world that we're looking for basics in. And here we have a whole world of object essence. We can go to every part of the earth and find out the truths of things. We can sit quietly and watch, even on television, a great many things that are essentially true if we want to think about them, or untrue which we should know about.
Right.
And yet, with all these things, the individual makes very little effort to change himself. He knows that things are wrong, but he believes that freedom is very important. He has come to the conclusion that freedom is the right to do wrong. It is the right to do as he pleases. But then, if he was scientific, he would know this is not true. There isn't an atom that floats in space that is free. Everything is under immutable energy principles and laws. And man is also under these laws, and he has tried from the beginning of his existence to wiggle out from under them. He has tried to create a human code of existence that will hold and survive in a divine world of immutable principles. At least after all these ages, we have reached a point where we can contemplate something of this immutable world in which we live. We begin to realize that somewhere out there, where we do not know, but we're not going to find it out where it is by means of space flights,
Right.
because these things are all on a level. They are part of a physical experience of enlargement, but the answer does not lie in the physical. The answer comes through the physical, but from a source much higher than itself. So we are looking for peace in corpuscles and in atoms and molecules, when we can only find it on an entirely different basis. We have to recognize gradually that the foundation of life is something that we build with the heart, the mind, and the hands. Build it ourselves. Build it through our own conduct. Most all mystics from the earliest time have held it to be true that growth is the basis of enlightenment, that the individual must come to a higher state of understanding because he has achieved a higher state of conduct. Now, this is one of the problems that has been known from the times of the Greeks and Hammurabi and the pharaohs of Egypt, and back even further into the mysteries of the cave dwellers. Namely, that to be better, you must do better. You must solve problems, or the problems will come back. You cannot avoid responsibility without having the consequences of avoidance to live with. These things are very obvious and very sensible, and there's no one that lives through a normal lifespan who hasn't plenty of evidence accumulated to make these necessary improvements in himself. But again, we are in a problem. And in this problem, I think we have to recognize that most people are in a state of great confusion. They are confused with fear and uncertainties. They are reaching out for solutions, but the solutions for the most part are problems in character and integrity, and these are not yet the dominant approach to the solution of difficulties. We are looking for an answer to a world that seems to be crumbling around us. And in this state of things, fear moves in. This fear leads to neurosis. And this neurosis leads to a whole complex of psychological conditions. The individual, frightened to death over the problems of the day, discouraged and variously afflicted by the competitions around him in life, is looking for peace of mind, peace of soul, peace of living. And he doesn't know where to find it, and he doesn't know how to find it. Now, out of all of this also, we have another phenomenon coming along. These disturbed, uncertain, mostly anxious people, in whose personal lives difficulties are piling up, are developing internal hypersensitivities, which can break through a series of psychic phenomena. This psychic phenomena has been the problem since the beginning of history. And there's no denying that some of it is genuine, but there's also no way of denying that much of it is an escape mechanism of a troubled mind. And where this comes along, the individual is apt to find that he is self-deluded, and that he is also escaping the real fact. It is easier to hope to dream one's way to enlightenment than it is to sit down and take care of the problems that are causing the trouble. So to get down to basics, growth is a matter of improvement and control and discipline. It is not a problem of hope and expectancy and various escape mechanisms which look as though they might make life a little more comfortable, but in the end generally make it more desperate and dangerous. Actually, the internal life is part of a divine plan. It is true, as it was in the days of Egypt and the Grecian philosophers, that those who are able to improve the standard of their own personal living are the ones who are keeping the rules, and therefore capable of having a good religion, a good philosophy, and a proper activity to keep the hand well occupied. So the problem is, do we want to fool ourselves again? Or do we want to accept strange abstractions that mean nothing in daily living? Are we going to follow out into some starry mystery world beyond when we can't live decently here? The thoughtful person, again, is looking for basics, looking for foundations upon which to build and gain for himself a proper form or pattern for daily existence. So we find always that the individual has to work his own life into a pattern of consistencies. Wherever so-called mystical experiences arise without proper discipline of character, there is danger. There is the possibility that the person is being self-deluded or is being deluded by others because he is willing to accept a shortcut to enlightenment, which does not exist. Therefore, we start in on basics. We have to earn the ability to use them. Our basics in religion come very simple and very easy. Religiously, the beginning of religion is religious conduct. The individual who lives the religious life will receive the consolation of an internal religious adjustment. If he earns an inward enlightenment in the field of religion, he will receive it. If he does not earn it, he must take second-hand hope from others who may not have found it either. So I think they have to take into consideration immediately that all solution is a matter of growth. It is not a matter primarily of what society is doing or institutions that are being built. It is primarily the individual correcting his own mistakes, and by correcting his own mistakes, increasing the area of his insights and understandings. When the person has found a proper level of internal adjustment, then he can read with benefit. Then he can study with success. Then he can study any art or science, trade or craft, and unsoul it from within himself. He can be a carpenter, but he can also be a mystic carpenter. And a mystic carpenter does not mean that the carpenter starts to build houses in the abstract elements of space. He builds the house right here, but he has within himself an insight as to what it all means. And like the Essenes of the Holy Land, who were carpenters by trade, he builds, puts the best he knows into it. Everything he does is a masterpiece from his own heart, because it is through building homes for those who need them that he worships God. All constructive labor is worship, and labor without worship is very little reward, and very often leads to a shoddy and inadequate relationship with the jobs at hand. So religion is work. Religion is doing these things in everyday existence. Religion is the individual who worships by keeping the integrities of life. He worships by caring for his children. He worships by maintaining the ethics of his community in every way that he can. He worships by being honest in his weights and measures. He worships also by forgiving his enemies. He worships by meeting every responsibility that is normal to him, growing through the fulfillment of proper activity rather than the effort to avoid or evade it. All avoidance and evasion is contrary to the natural law. So natural law stands there, and those who have worked with it, those who have really gotten together and made a real good job of it, have found that nature is with them. They will find, and always have found, that the only way to be happy is to keep the rules. And the rules were not made by men, and most man-made rules are not very good. So we go on then and we say, religion is the problem of living every day as we should. Now, no one is going to be perfect. It is not expected. But it is expected that every individual will make a good try. And by making a better effort, will become more capable of understanding what religion really is. The person who has no interest in living it cannot possibly understand the meaning of religion or its importance in daily conduct. Therefore, we try in every way that we can to make worship manifested in works, and that everything we do well glorifies that power that does all things well. And when we keep the rules of the universe keeps us. Now another angle of the problem comes into, we'll say, education. Now here we have the mind at work. Now most peoples are ruined more or less mentally by the attitudes of their parents and ancestors. The family mistakes are carefully passed along for fear that somebody might outgrow them. It is necessary to keep the feuds alive. And you know that as that goes on, more and more people are more and more unhappy. What is the purpose of education? Well, it's very obvious. If you take the right course in the right school, you can probably become a millionaire in the course of time. You will also be dead in the course of time. And the millions that you have will go back to the government. And the only one that really aids or gets anything out of all of this struggle is the tax that you pay the government. Actually, the problem is education should and must sometime recognize that it is related to the individual learning to live constructively. A person who has a good education has found an outlet for some ideal, dream, hope, or aspiration within himself. He is coming to learn the tools of his craft or trade. He is a builder, but he has to learn architecture. He is a mathematician, but he has to start with a multiplication table. He wants to make great pictures or write great music, but he must start and learn the skills to do it. And when he has those skills, he must use them according to natural law. He must not profane or corrupt anything of beauty. If he does, he damages himself. He must never sacrifice quality for profit, or he will destroy his own ethics. And when he destroys enough of these ethics, he does not know what to do next, so he goes to narcotics or alcohol. Actually, each person who learns a profession or a trade or a business career is earning a way to use his religion, to use the divine overtones within his own nature. Education must include all of the basic elements of religion. It must include the golden rule, and no individual who does not learn to forgive his enemies can ever consider himself to be truly educated. He is learned and schooled, and he is going to be in the same trouble that the learned and the schooled have been for ages. It was a good educational system, but it didn't prevent the Inquisition. It did not prevent over 800 wars in the last 2,000 years. But civilization is not merely a vanity. It's not a great competitive field of extravagance. Civilization is the individual gradually growing up to the point that he knows what is right and has the strength and courage and wisdom to do what is right. So education needs a thorough house cleaning. We do not need all this abstract kind of thing without some emphasis upon use. We can create artists and musicians and scholars. We can create lawyers and doctors and psychiatrists. We can produce all kinds of people. But the main thing education should give these young people as they grow up is the realization of the responsibility of right use. To have a skill and not know what to do with it, or a skill and consider that it is perfectly proper to abuse it for personal profit at the expense of others, is barbarism and, most of all, total ignorance. The individual who does not have a right motive for what he does is ignorant. We cannot say the motive does not exist, because in a strange way, the very person who is breaking the rules hopes that other people are not going to break them also at his expense. He doesn't want to be hurt, but he doesn't mind hurting someone else. So always education must be dedication. The individual must realize that knowledge is a divine bestowal. It is made possible by the faculties of the individual and by the basic structures of society. It is something that he must respect, something that he must use. It doesn't mean that he is less practical. He knows he must make a living. He knows that he must be responsible for his part of the world's burden. But he will know also that in making this adjustment, he is a servant of truth. He is working for a great cause, the gradual and inevitable unfoldment of human nature and collective humanity. Then when he gets down to the trades and business of life, he has his offices and his secretaries and his clerks. He has the factory with all his workmen and all this type of thing. And in his business relationships as management, he has a little universe of his own. For the individual who rules a business that has 15, 20, 25,000 employees, this ruler is a kind of God. He is something more than just an ordinary person, for he has the right, a physical right, to discharge or employ. He has the right to criticize or applaud. It is his responsibility to manage this particular group of people. Now he has responsibilities to these people. He has responsibilities that may interfere with profit. But if the responsibilities are ignored and profit becomes the principal aim, he with his business is going to be in the same general condition that the world is with its own unfinished business. He is going to find the temptation to exploit the privilege of leadership. He will exploit it politically, socially, scientifically, professionally. But the moment he exploits it, he breaks faith with truth. And the moment he breaks faith with truth, his own personal life begins to fall apart. And one of these days he will find that he has sacrificed too much to vanity and has not kept the faith that alone could make him a real person. So in business and all these fields of activity as we see them today, We see a crushing competitiveness. We see a world struggling for domination. We find people in all walks of life locked in conflict with each other. We find no one hardly willing to excuse any defect in others, but expecting to have all others excuse his defects. And little by little, every part of society comes to loggerheads. We have it today. We're no longer in a world in which people fought on the basis of principles. Now they fight over the same principles. We have many different sects of people who believe in brotherhood and are at war with themselves and each other. We find a tyranny of conflicting creeds. We find that religion is gradually entering into a great competitiveness in which it hopes to take over the world for its own creed and eliminate all others. This type of competitiveness is certainly not according to nature. In nature, variety adds to beauty. Here we cannot tolerate variety if it interferes with our own conceptions. What would the valleys and the mountains be if there was only one kind of flower? What would we think of the wild creatures of life if there was only one breed? What do we think, or how could we get along with one system of thought if all else was removed? Everywhere variety is life. The combinations of nature are all symmetrical and harmonic. The great music of the ages is infinite variety on a simple keyboard. And yet that variety gives us great joy and great pleasure. What would we feel like if somebody struck one note for hundreds of years and never changed? We would say that it's impossible, incredible, unbelievable. So change and variety is life. It is a wonderful thing that we have a half a dozen major religions and maybe 100 smaller ones. As long as all of these religions keep their rules, do what they dedicate themselves to doing, and learn to be pleasant and tolerant with each other, variety is beautiful. But now we can't stand it. If we can't convert them, we're going to destroy them. And this is true all over the Near East at the present time. It is true in a large part of Asia, and it is increasingly true here in America. We cannot stand differences of opinion, although nobody knows who is right. Right hasn't any part in it. It's do you agree with me or don't you? Well, no matter how many times we try, there's always be somebody who doesn't agree with us. So it becomes an endless conflict, strikes and agitations and bombings, cruelty. And we think we are civilized, grown-up people, and that the past was made up of barbarians. Many of these barbarians were much better people than we are, even though we do not realize it. And we can take their virtues and get over some of our own vices with benefit to all concerned. We know that in many parts of the world today, comparative religion is acceptable, but we're trying to kill it out here because of various motives. Some of these motives are very sincere, others are not. But the individual does not have to surrender to anything that is less than tolerance. And tolerance is more than just willingness to endure. Tolerance is the ability to get along with, to work along with these things in a constructive manner. So we think that the basic problem is a little bit like the famous three-headed Brahma in the great cave temple of Elephanta in the harbor of Bombay in India. Three faces of one God. In some of the early missals of the Christian church, Christ is represented with three faces. And all through theology, the three-faced being was part of the philosophy of the Knights Templars, and also seems to sneak into some of the mystical works of the 17th century.
That's cool.
One being with three faces. In fact, this was one of the great problems of conflict in the early church, with the various conventions trying to decide how to solve the problem of 1 in 3 or 3 in 1. This situation means actually that the divine power is three-faced. It has the three great likenesses, the three great visages. It has three eyes: the eye of the heart, the eye of the mind, and the eye in the palm of the hand, as we find in Oriental imagery. These three faces represent the three basic powers by which the universe was created. We don't know where and when it was created, and science doesn't seem to be in any danger of finding out. It has going to do all kinds of things, but when it gets through trying to find what's inside of the black hole, it will find another smaller black hole or a larger one, and so on infinitum. It will not ever come to the end, because the surface of things is never final. That which must be found within things, the search inward towards cause, is the only thing that can possibly result in the release of the plan or purpose for existence. In any effect, however, regardless how you look at it, the problem goes on that each individual must find the way to use the three faces that he has within himself. Some say that one face is to the future, one to the past, and one is now. All over the world there are trinities of one kind or another. The one, the beautiful, and the good was the great trinity of Socrates. There is always this threefoldness of things, this three levels of thinking, of feeling, of being, which must be brought into harmony. The hand must be trained to do the will of the Spirit. And the will of the Spirit does not mean to use it to knock down somebody. The problem of the hand is also the skills to create beauty, to make those things that are necessary to human good. The hand that holds the hammer is also the hand that holds the pen, writes the books, writes the songs, plays the instruments. All of these things are labors of the hand. And these labors must be taken hold of, they must be studied, they must be worked with until the hand becomes an instrument of universal good. The good in each of us must express through the hand, because there are certain things that cannot be done except with the aid of the hand. It is the hand with which the Good Samaritan must raise up his brother. The hand is the hand we shake hands with, even though at the time we do it, we may not know what we are doing. In the early days, handshaking was a very interesting thing, and maybe this has come down to us also, more than we realize. In the ancient days, men shook hands, and they shook hands with their right hands to prove they were not holding a weapon. In other words, the handshake was a symbol that the individual was not planning or aiming to hurt the other person. He was not going to cheat him. He was not going to stab him in the back. He was not going to hit him. He was going to prove conclusively that at that moment amity existed between himself and the other person. Now when we shake hands today, I wonder what it means.
Right.
I wonder if we're sure that the fellow we shake hands with is not going to foreclose the mortgage the next day. It doesn't mean anything now. It is simply a gesture. But it had originally just as much a real meaning as any mudra or hand posture of religion. It was a symbol of brotherhood, of fraternity, of trust, of peace, and cooperation. And while it had those meanings, it was significant. Those meanings should come back. If they do not come back, the handshake means nothing. If it does not seal a cooperative relationship, it means nothing. The same way with all of the labors of the hands. Everything should have some use for it, some goodness in it. And the hands that are clasped in prayer are only acceptable to the Most High if those hands have worked for the good of mankind. We give our hands to God in prayer, and in so doing, rededicate them to the universal labor of human betterment. It's the same thing with our minds. We have minds, we have all kinds of thoughts. Some of them are not anything to brag about, and some are really quite noble in their way. the great sermon, the great poem, the great literary epic, the great book on philosophy or theology, all these things are products of the mind in action. The mind's purpose is to be dedicated to the advancement of the common good. The mind has to work out a whole series of decisions in itself. It must realize that it can contribute humor and happiness, that it can make life easier by properly addressing a need. We also find out that the mind is the better for the wider knowledge it possesses. But knowledge is not necessarily merely book reading. The great knowledge comes from daily living. Paracelsus said those who would read the book of nature must walk it with their feet. The kind of knowledge that we find in Bacon's essays is a knowledge that comes from a quiet contemplation of what is real and what is necessary and what is good. It is a sifting out of things that are useless. It is the ability to curb the tongue when it might otherwise say something that is unpleasant. And of course the mind must never prevaricate. It must never lie. It must never bring false witness. It never swear to something that is not true. Nor should it try to sell inferior products by a big advertising program. All of the great industrial activities are keyed to mind, but a great many of them are a use of the mind to exploit the lives of other people. We can protect ourselves against this, and we can try in our own lives and our own ways to use the mind always for as much good as possible. That we use it to think things through, that we use it to decide how we can serve others best, that we can use it to remind us of jobs and duties, responsibilities, and most of all, that it is an alchemist, by means of which all responsibilities can be transmuted into opportunities. All these things are parts of the mind's labor. It must gain all knowledge that it can, and use all that it has gained for the common good of all that lives. This was another one of Bacon's thoughts. Also, we come now again back to religion. Religion in a mysterious way is the sum of everything. Religion to each nation, each generation, each people has been a little different, but it is always the supreme over thing. Very few have really attempted to explain it completely. We know the various forms of worship. In Peru, for example, the natives worship God by kissing the sunlight. A very abstract and unphysical approach. They didn't want to have any physical form. In the Orient, letters and sounds of an alphabet take the place of figures in the worship of deity. But what is the real answer to it all is this strange sense that we must have, which is the basis of an appropriate humility towards everything of life. We are in the midst of mystery. We have not solved this mystery.
In the midst of mystery.
It is very possible that we can never solve this mystery until we become with it in an infinite future. But the only way we can ever know deity is to gradually grow up to the understanding of the infinite power at the source of life. In the meantime, religion is the great benevolent mystery. We have given it all kinds of names and thoughts. We believe that when we pray, our prayer is heard by something. We believe that in emergency, we are strengthened by faith in God. And that faith is faith in something above ourselves, something more powerful, more useful, more immediate. Most people of religious belief feel convinced that deity is approachable, that they cannot understand deity, but that deity can understand them. And in this understanding, they await the will of deity. And this will of deity is something that the world has loved from the beginning, and however it interprets or however we try to study it, there is an immense strength there, the only strength man has. How can he have strength in institutions which he will sometimes survive, or which may for a short time survive him? How can he have confidence and faith and satisfaction in situations which have no value to anyone actually, including himself? How can he substitute wealth for peace of heart or peace of mind? How can adventure and change and emotional stimulation take the place of this inward appreciation of value? Every individual, therefore, has to have this inner part of himself. And this inner part is the three-faced God. For all parts of knowledge, science, religion, and philosophy are attributes and aspects of one power. They are the basic breaking of one light upon a prism. They are the one power manifesting on three levels of function. There are other levels, but we do not know them. But in all things, the three move together, and the very processes of learning bring both the others into focus. There can be no philosophy without religion and science. There can be no science without religion and philosophy. And there can be no philosophy itself, or no religion, or any of these things, except in the compound of the three. They must work together. They are aspects of one thing, conditions of one quality, expressions of one life. And in this time, where we are under such burden of stress and so many problems are afflicting us, it seems very important that the individual should try to get rid of the conflicts and prejudices and conceits which he has regarded as loyalties. What is loyalty? Finally, it is loyalty to truth as we know it, or as we are capable of understanding it. Truth for man is relative. It is truth for his kind in its own time. He must try to supply that which is necessary to preserve the best in things as they are, rescue the best from things that have been, and dedicate the best to the unfinished labors of the future. All these things are part of the problem of living. We don't want to have it appear, however, that this all adds up to a pretty heavy job, that it's something that we should approach with trepidation. Actually, the doing it right procedure is 1,000 times more simple than what we are trying to do for the most part today. We are not really achieving in comparison to the energy that we are expending. It is very much like the problem of taxation. The taxes go up, but the buying power of the money goes down. And in all the money that we spend, we may still not be able to actually bring the necessities of life to the human beings on this planet. We can't do it this way. We cannot solve our problems by trying to follow political structures or any of the traditional values. The world is more inhabited now. In the time of Plato or Socrates or Pythagoras, there probably were less than 500 million people on Earth. Today we are pressing 6 billion. We have a world that is more and more indebted to a little planet that is our hope of glory and our hope of salvation. We have done everything we could do to wreck that planet. We haven't followed the Egyptians, who refer to our planet as Mother Earth and worship it as the source of all life. We don't worship the earth anymore. We're too sophisticated for that. We're too smart and too wise to pay homage to our own source of life. We are not worshiping the earth, but also we are therefore not careful of our use of what the earth provides. We do not recognize the harvest as a marvelous gift of nature, and we are not certain as to whether or not the farmer can continue to survive. All the things that would make things a little nicer, a little better, have in them an element of worship. There has to be something that we care for, something that is just a little more sacred than we have considered it usually. Our petroleum is something also. And we just go out and use it. We don't realize the fact that maybe someday we won't have it. And therefore our best process would be to be wise, loving, unselfish now, and help to keep these resources as long as possible. It is astonishing, one of the great wonders of nature, that the earth is able to sustain us. That in some mysterious way, even though populations increase, they survive. And they survive because there is something more than physical structure to the earth. It is a center upon which energies from the sun and from other planets converge and keep a constant process of reformation and rehabilitation. The earth is forever producing, not only the grain in the earth, but in the clouds, the water, everything. Nature has given us a tremendously complicated and incredible boat on which to sail across the sea of life. It has given us something that no human being could conceivably make. And behind the little part of it that we see is an intricate machinery extending throughout the whole of space. We are part of a tremendous thing. And this tremendous thing is obviously dedicated to good. As far as we can see, it is working for us. It is doing for us everything that is necessary to keep us alive. Everything that nature does is constructive and productive until man abuses it. So we are going to have to recognize religion as a reformation that gives us the internal insight to stop abusing the natural benefits and benevolences with which we are surrounded. Everything is part of something good, and man is a kind of a wayward child. The individual is a little bit of a delinquent and a little bit of a perpetual adolescent, but he can get over both with a little effort. And now, in this time particularly, we are beginning to realize the facts of life. We are realizing the fact that each day may bring a new complication. We are realizing the fact that half the world today is locked in struggle to the death. We are in the evidence that the various policies and various patches we have put on world conditions are not right and are not holding. Therefore, we are now getting very close to the time when we have no real recourse, no escape from the terrible necessity of doing something right. We are going to be finding that unless we do it as it was intended, we will continue to have trouble. But if we do keep the rules, they will keep us. So now, in the middle of a great emergency, more and more people are beginning to think. They are beginning to dream of getting together and doing things. They are beginning to realize the concept that was set forth in Bacon's New Atlantis, which he said, which is America, and in which, according to his concept as a scientist, there would be a great world of progress, great libraries, great schools, great laboratories, observatories, a vast accumulation of truth-seeking facilities. And he says that these truth-seeking facilities, all the products of human ingenuity in this wonderful new world, will be dedicated unconditionally to the advancement and well-being of humanity. There will no longer be development for private profit in that sense of the word, but everything that man discovers will be used to help man to grow. We've made more discoveries probably in this country than all the rest of the world put together. Now comes the time to redeem these discoveries, to convert them to a great moral ethical code, to make them part of a worldwide and eternal program of fulfilling the divine purpose as it has been set in the hearts and souls of human beings. If we do this, we'll find an answer. And of course we will do it, because nature will keep on making us miserable until we're tired of it. Until we suddenly wake up someday and say, this misery is due to me and not to the universe. I am not the victim of a despotism somewhere out in the vicissitudes of space. I am the individual who, in the presence of right, have continued to be selfish. who have continued to think of myself only in a time when everyone must unite for the common labor of survival. Out of all conflict, then, may come an alchemical form of transmutation. The base elements of the human experience, whether it's social, political, religious, philosophical, economic, all of these base elements must be transmuted into not only pure gold, but according to the alchemists themselves, the elixir of life. Out of all these experiences must come the nutrition of enlightenment, a nutrition by which all people, working together, using the resources of nature as they were intended to be used, and finding out the meaning of things, and dedicated to the right use of everything we know and possess. As this time comes, we will find our problems fade away. And instead of being poor little outlawed creatures who have nothing to live for because we can no longer be dishonest, we will be very happy creatures, realizing that from the beginning we would have been happy if we kept the rules, and that until we keep the rules, problems will pile up. So the basic fact today is to keep the rule, to find all that we can on every branch of learning that can tell us what to do now that is permanent, what is solutional for ourselves, how to get rid of the nagging grudges and all the selfishness and bitterness and conspiracy with which we have burdened the human race. When we find the answer to that which is making us miserable, we will find that we will be happy, and that happiness is not something in which we can no longer do what we want. Happiness is now and can be in the future the magnificence of doing what we should, and by so doing, being a better world for ourselves and those who come after us.
Yeah, almost done.
The basic problem today is to get back to the principles, to get back to the common values of life, as stated in every great religion in the world, and believed by practically everyone who has lived prior to this glorious era of enlightenment in which we believe in nothing. To get back the simple beliefs of childhood, to get back to love as a solution and hate as something that died out long ago. When we get to this type of point in the condition in our own lives, we will find it's not going to be too hard to keep the world happy and to keep our planet floating quietly, gracefully, and peacefully in orbit. It is up to us to do these things. If we make mistakes, we must correct them. Nature is patient. Nature can absorb into itself all mistakes. But the problem of absorbing a major mistake is a little uncomfortable, and we should try in every way possible to avoid that. Get back to the basic, simple facts of life, and let all the involvements and all the pretty patterns rest for the moment, and realize there is no answer to the problem of survival for us and growth and progress, except to make the necessary changes in our own natures so that we can live together in peace, serving each other and worshiping God with a clear conscience. Well, that's it, folks.
He always ends it the same way. Well, that's it, folks. Oh, got him. Anyway, give me a second. I'll be right back, though.
soft. She's power, she's God. She's able to have a child, so because a woman is soft, she's power, she's God. She's able to have a child, so you can give her the world, but it's not even big enough for her.
I hate male feminists.
Because a woman is soft, she's power, she's God. She's able to have a child, so you can give her the world, but it's not even big enough for her.
I hate male feminists, so.
That shit's funny. The fucking first play of the game. There we go.
Because a woman is soft, she's power, she's God. She's able to have a child, so you can give her the world, but it's not even big enough for her.
I hate male feminists, so.
What's the difference between feminist women shaming men for being men and traditional women shaming men for not being real men?
Tradcons are undercover feminists.
Uh-oh. We got a lead now.
Why is it when we talk about women's issues, it's considered the war on women, but when we talk about men's issues, it's considered the war on masculinity?
Yeah, because America's bullshit and men deserve rights too. I'm not a woman. I'm not a woman who's like women rights. I will be glad to cook and clean and stay home.
I guess because women feel like they've been victimized for a long time, so they're making up for lost time. I'm not sure exactly how to put that.
Why don't we consider it a war on men any more than we consider it a war on femininity?
Because if we're looking back at the women feel they've been victimized over a long period of time, if they were the victim, then that would make the men the predator, more or less.
Because we have this thing with men that we're not allowed to acknowledge that we're being victimized, that we're being attacked. Only women are allowed to be seen as victims.
Right.
Can someone be masculine but not a man, or be a man but not masculine?
Yes.
So why then is masculinity even applied to men in the first place?
I think because of traditional beliefs.
No, I think you could be a man and not masculine. You know, I think there's a middle ground there. I think we kind of push like super masculinity, but you don't have to be a masculine to be considered a real man.
So then why is masculinity even applied to men in the first place?
Because
We gotta run it back, man. Hold on.
Because a woman is soft, she's power, she's God. She's able to have a child, so you can give her the world, but it's not even big enough for her.
I hate male feminists, so.
What's the difference between feminist women shaming men for being men and traditional women shaming men for not being real men?
Tradcons are undercover feminists.
Why is it when we talk about women's issues, it's considered the war on women, but when we talk about men's issues, it's considered the war on masculinity?
Yeah, because America's bullshit and men deserve rights too. I'm not a woman. I'm not a woman who's like women rights. I will be glad to cook and clean and stay home.
I guess because women feel like they've been victimized for a long time, so they're making up for lost time. I'm not sure exactly how to put that.
Why don't we consider it a war on men any more than we consider it a war on femininity?
Because if we're looking back at the women feel they've been victimized over a long period of time, if they were the victim, then that would make the men the predator, more or less.
Because we have this thing with men that we're not allowed to acknowledge that we're being victimized, that we're being attacked. Only women are allowed to be seen as victims.
Can someone be masculine but not a man, or be a man but not masculine?
yes.
So why then is masculinity even applied to men in the first place?
I think because of traditional beliefs.
No, I think you could be a man and not masculine. You know, I think there's a middle ground there. I think we kind of push like super masculinity, but you don't have to be a masculine to be considered a real man.
So then why is masculinity even applied to men in the first place?
Because, I don't know, it's just like assumed that men are supposed to be masculine, I guess.
I'm not sure how you would define masculinity anymore. And I see couples all the time where you can tell that the woman is the masculine. I mean, straight couples where, you can tell the woman is actually absolutely the masculine in the couple. So I don't know that it's not defined as black and white as it used to be for sure.
Why is there so much confusion about what a woman is, but everyone seems to know what a real man is?
That's a damn good question. I mean, penis, vagina, that's all I gotta say.
Why can a woman be anything she wants while a man is still clearly defined?
Penis, vagina, I don't know. I'm done with it, yeah.
I don't know. Women are just different. They just have to be different. Women have so many different personalities. Men are just like confirmed, like they're very simplistic. Women are very difficult.
Because the pressure to perform is always on men. So there's always a set expectation, there's always a set bar of what you have to do.
Why can a woman be anything she wants while a man is still clearly defined?
Because we live in a gynocentric world, and if a man had that same perspective that you could do anything you want, then it would kind of be hard for men to be controlled.
It's a part of the agenda, and women wanting to break into the patriarch. And the way to do that is to confuse and to defuse anything that might be perceived as masculine and not praise anything that is truly a masculine trait beyond the convenient traits.
Why can a woman be anything she wants while a man is still clearly defined?
Well, because again, like I said, the future is female, and that's the agenda they want us to progress to. So that's what the narrative is. But at the end of the day, as men, we set our boundaries, we establish ourselves as such, and we're gonna always be men regardless. True men knew that. Regardless, and a real woman will recognize and respect it either way.
How would you define mansplaining?
I would define it as a man explaining to a woman about something that they think they have no or little previous knowledge of.
When a man starts to push a solution rather than listening to the nature of the problem, a lot of times a woman just wants to express her frustration. Man's got to solve it. And that can be a pain. Advice when it's not wanted or when it's forced.
How is that different than women explaining what a real man is?
Because women explaining what a real man is them shaming you to conform to what they want you to do and who they want you to be as a man.
Women explaining what a real man is sounds like nonsense. So I would say they have something in common. They're both nonsensical.
Yeah. Who is the bigger simp, a male feminist or a chivalrous white knight who believes all women are sacred?
The feminist.
Why?
Both of them are just doing it to try to get in the person's pants. But the feminist...
The one that thinks all women are sacred, because the worst thing you could do is pedestalize women and think that a woman is better than you, because you gotta devalue yourself when you do that.
Isn't chivalry pushed by religious conservatives?
Yes, but chivalry is dead.
I think that feminists can be chivalrous. So that part I stand on, you know what I'm saying? I mean, to be chivalrous, I can be chivalrous to a little old lady and give her my seat on the bus, right? Same thing to define it, I believe.
Don't women define masculinity based on what benefits them?
Yes, absolutely.
So how are the traditional women any better than the feminist women?
Well, they all are beautiful and deserve to be protected, but at the same time, as men, we have to establish our boundaries, respect our own boundaries, respect women, protect women, and not deal with bullshit.
What is the difference between feminist women shaming men for being toxically masculine versus traditional women shaming men for not being masculine enough?
There's really no difference. You know, men can't really do anything to win. It's like no matter what you do, you're always gonna take an L.
You know, it's crazy because the women, the modern women that are shaming men for being masculine, most of them are masculine. So it doesn't make any sense at all. It really doesn't.
So how are the traditional women any better than the feminist women?
They're not. They're both shaming men into conforming to what they think is more beneficial to them.
Don't women define masculinity based on what benefits them?
I think everybody defines everything in the world on what benefits them.
Right.
I mean, that's everybody trying to see the best for themselves. You know what I'm saying? That's human nature, I think.
So just because you're anti-feminist, does that necessarily mean you're pro-men?
No, not at all. I think both sides have an equal amount of women that hate men.
So why isn't misandry the problem rather than masculinity?
Misandry is a huge problem that no one ever talks about. All we talk about is misogyny, but it should definitely be talked about more.
What's the difference between feminists labeling anything they don't like as misogyny versus conservatives labeling anything they don't like as immorality?
There is no difference. It's always shaming what you don't want and shaming what doesn't fit your narrative. It's always shame, shame, shame.
It's ridiculous for someone to impose their religious morality on someone, use it to shame them. It just doesn't make any sense for a man to do that, a religious person to do that. It doesn't make any sense for a woman to do that. They're not making a better world. I mean, they're just like, the world should be like me. That's a pathetic kind of narcissism. That's a disease.
I mean, I think that the masculine women are trying to be something that maybe they don't necessarily fit into the role, so they're trying to change the role. And the traditional women are having a hard time because their role is going away. You know what I'm saying? It's like evaporating. Everything is very fluid right now. Everything is changing.
Aren't they both coming from a self-righteous ideology?
Just like men, it's no different. Everybody's got the self-righteous ideology, if you think about it. Unless they're totally insecure and you know what I'm saying, and can't stand up for themselves, those are the only people that are not trying to see things from their point of view.
Who shames male sexuality more? Feminists for labeling men as sexual predators, or religious conservatives for shaming sex outside marriage?
I think the ones that shame sex outside of marriage, for sure, because they look at it as anybody that's not married is kind of committing a sin. And
if men want purity, wouldn't that mean men have to wait until marriage? And haven't we established men shouldn't be getting married under the current laws?
I do believe that if men want purity, it does mean waiting until marriage, but I am not up to date on the current laws.
I don't believe that anybody should get married without having sex first, because if the sex is no good, the marriage won't last, period.
Right. I mean, I don't think you have to wait till marriage to find a pure woman, but I definitely think the laws need to change because they don't benefit us at all. Why would any man want to get married under the current laws?
Why are conservatives still pushing for traditional gender roles in marriage without first changing the laws?
Well, marriage isn't set up for men to be beneficiaries if it ends. And regardless, in our society, women have always been the protected class.
Because even though the laws don't benefit us, there's a lot of profit in divorce. So it kind of benefits, a certain system for the laws to still stay in place, as messed up as that sounds.
They're just pushing for what they know. That's all. It's like they're stuck in a rut, and that's where they're going to stay. They don't want to expand their thought process. They believe what they believe is right, which is, it's not wrong. You know what I'm saying? For those people, let them do what they want to do. If you think it's wrong, or you think you should only eat fish on Friday, then for you, that's all you should eat. I don't feel that way, so I shouldn't be held to those standards.
If being a masculine man means accepting the burden of others, why would anyone want to be a man by that definition?
You wouldn't, but the pressure is no matter what the circumstances, no matter the situation, you as a man just have to take it and perform anyways.
Take it like a man?
Yes, sir.
A real man is not going to look at things as a burden. It's just certain things that you go through in life to get to where you want to get to, and sometimes you got to help other people out. It's not a burden. Everything is a lesson and and something to learn from.
I think people miss strong men. We look at the chaotic world we're in, the riots, people taking advantage and stealing, just going into a store. Doesn't the world want someone to stand up and say, knock this shit off? I'm not going to stand here and watch this anymore. It's wrong. I was put on this earth for a reason. I am going to fight it when I see it. That's what a man is. You want to call that toxic, you can. I don't.
If being masculine is a natural process, why are men often shamed to be sculpted that way?
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing of becoming high value, I think that's the main thing, right? Where it's kind of like you're shamed to become high value, and if you're not high value, you're low value, where there should be a middle ground of men that are still at a good place in their life, but still trying to become better each day.
Why should men continue to be placed into a sacrificial role when women have been liberated from their role?
You know what? Life is what you make it. Always has been, always will be. So men putting themselves into that role, that's the option. They put themselves there. If you don't want to be there, then don't be there.
Why was manhood always defined as a servitude to women?
Because the expectation is that a man should provide, regardless, that is your duty.
I don't believe it was. It's the opposite. I believe that women were defined as a servitude to men. With that whole Adam and Eve thing, and she was made from the rib, and so she was supposed to be blah, 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 all that, yeah.
Why is it that in the age of independent women, a man's value is often determined by what he provides?
Well, it's kind of hypocritical, right? Because these independent women can do everything by themselves, but yet they still want a man to provide, so there's hypocrisy there.
But like I said, that's changing some. I mean, there are some women that are out there making the money now, and the guy's staying home, so then it's by what the woman, by what the masculine role provides. How's that? Which doesn't have to be male or female.
Why are we still promoting traditionalism when most women don't want to be traditional?
Yeah, Most women don't want to be traditional, but the pressure is on us to still be traditional either way. Regardless of how they behave, we're still expected to stick to our gender roles.
Do women want to be independent while also being provided for?
Of course they do.
And if so, who's more delusional in their wants?
Woman, definitely.
Isn't that having your cake and eating it too?
Yeah, of course it is. It's delicious.
We put our blinders on and we see it as, this is amazing, I have a man that loves and cares for me. But also at the same time, women want to be able to be independent of themselves and work hard for themselves and be proud of what they've earned.
How are men supposed to be providers when they now have to compete in a job market that favors women?
Right, because women are going to get the job over you. So if you're expected to provide, how can you provide when the jobs are being taken from you?
Equality and equity. You got to understand the difference. And once society recognizes the differences, we can create a solution that everybody benefits.
If we push traditionalism, are we going to remove equal employment opportunities, which prevent men from fulfilling the traditional roles they're advocating for?
Yeah, they're definitely not going to change the laws. You know, the deck is kind of stacked against us. You know, the expectation is that we got to provide, we got to perform, but the laws kind of don't favor us at all to be even able to do that in the first place.
If being a masculine man means accepting the burden of others, why would anyone want to be a man by that definition?
Because that's what we do. We go out there, we chop shit up, we blow shit up, and we handle business.
How does being masculine help men who are screwed over by the family court system?
It doesn't. You could be the most masculine person in the world. It doesn't stop you from getting screwed over by the laws, from getting screwed over from divorce. It doesn't stop anything.
They always favor the woman unless you have resounding evidence that that woman was really, 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 really terrible. And even sometimes still that doesn't matter. So at the end of the day, you just gotta have receipts.
How does being masculine help men who are falsely accused?
It doesn't. The laws have to change. Masculinity isn't an answer to the laws in the system. The laws have to change.
If you are honorable and noble, which are traits that are associated with masculinity as well, hopefully, prayerfully, inshallah, all those things will shine through.
Whether a man is masculine or not, doesn't he still deserve equal justice?
Absolutely, always.
So why is there so much focus about masculinity rather than men's rights?
Yeah, the masculinity agenda is pushed heavily, and we never focus on the laws, the actual problem that need to be changed and addressed.
Because at the end of the day, men have always made the laws. Men have always had the rights. Women couldn't vote. Women couldn't participate in certain things for a while. And after a while, those scales have to balance, and that's the time of reckoning that we are currently facing.
What's the difference between feminist women shaming men for being men and traditional women shaming men for not being real men?
There is no difference. It's shame men, shame men, shame men, bring them down and make them weak and able to be controlled.
If you're trying to make a man be what he's not, that's objectionable. If you're trying to make him tougher, you're trying to make him weaker. Just let him be what he is, you know?
Wouldn't that equate modern misandry to feminism and traditional misandry to chivalry?
That's a very good point. Yes, absolutely.
Don't both place women at a status above men?
Yep, women are always up here and men are always down here.
Wouldn't that equate modern misandry to feminism and traditional misandry to chivalry?
Traditional misandry. God, this is like being on Jeopardy. Okay.
Funny. Can't get the steal, bro. Go find him.
We have chosen for the first seminar this season a subject which perhaps is more vital and more far-reaching than might be first presumed. There is probably no school in the history of Western civilization that has more profoundly affected the course of human life for the last 19 centuries than the school of Neoplatonism. I realize that this will be challenged, or might be challenged, but I think as we proceed, the facts will be clear. As you know, a sentence taken out of a book has slight meaning when divided from its context. And there is no way of estimating Neoplatonism without first orienting it in the world of its time and conditions. So we must first prepare our groundwork by a general survey of the circumstances which made Neoplatonism not only possible, but necessary. We know that 2,000 years ago, civilization was centered in the Mediterranean or Aegean areas. In this region, three great cultures flourished: the Egyptian, the Greek, and the Latin or Roman. If we examine history at about the time of the rise of Neoplatonism, we observe that all three of these great dominant cultures were beginning to show signs of internal weakness or had already fallen. We know that the glory of Egypt was past, and the Egyptians were little better than a colony of Rome. Greece was in the same predicament. The old days of the great academy had vanished. Greek culture, Greek philosophy, Greek religion was declining. The last stronghold of the old world, old way of the world, was Rome. Rome under the Caesars. And Rome was already beginning to feel the inroads of the barbarian hordes from the north. And Rome was tottering on the brink of its own collapse. Now, three great cultures, three dominant civilizations cannot collapse or fail or gradually disintegrate and fall apart without producing a profound effect upon human beings. We live within systems. We live within patterns. And we know today what it means to experience insecurity in the patterns which are familiar to us. How much more, then, were these older people insecure when their entire system of culture was collapsing, when their religion was slowly failing, their sciences declining, their arts failing, their literatures and philosophies, their ethics, morality, all these, which are the foundations of enduring security, were slipping away from these three great ancient cultures. In this period of tremendous internal uncertainty, it is inevitable men's minds should have gradually turned toward a different perspective on life, a perspective that was best expressed, best revealed through the three schools that rose in this period: Christianity, Gnosticism, and Neoplatonism.
I'm gonna watch that shit too, but I got this other one I want to watch. Let me see. Let me find it real quick.
Changes and mystery primordial rabbit hole. The ancient knowledge will again abound and overflow as water upon the earth. The remains of this knowledge are everywhere about us in everyday use and perfect. This is a quote from a book, one of the early books I ever read on the subject of Kabbalah and geometry and mystery religions. It was entitled The Source of Measure, written in 1875 by J. Ralston Skinner. And I think I read this book over 50 years ago, and this particular quote really stuck with me for multiple reasons. So as we go through this material, we may come back and revisit this quote and see more in it than we're seeing upon the initial reading. Old English proverb, fire and water have no mercy. And of course, we know from myths and legends from all around the planet that there were two primary ways that the world was periodically destroyed, and it involved flood and fire. In the Greek terminology, flood was kataklysmos, from where we get the word cataclysm, and the destruction of the world by fire was ekparousis, the root of that term being pyro, meaning fire. And in some versions of it, the periodic destructions of the world alternated between one of fire and one of flood. We know that looking at the actual record, the geological record, the biological record, other proxy records of past changes, that there have been times when both fire and flood were involved almost simultaneously. I cite as an example the Younger Dryas Boundary, the lower Younger Dryas Boundary, that has preserves evidence of gigantic floods and also evidence of gigantic fires. So from the Arthurian tradition, we find this quote from Merlin, the magician: "It is the doom of men that they forget." And so there are certain traditions that have been handed down, certain customs, certain ceremonies, certain observations that we take for granted that actually conceal a much deeper meaning than what is assumed in a typical secular context. So in this particular case, as an example, we'll look at Halloween, or All Hallows Eve, and we'll consider some of its origin stories. Now, before we do that, I'm going to give a quote from the popular press that refers to Halloween and I think completely misses the reality of it. Lessons from the Great Pumpkin. Great Pumpkin, of course, was from the Charlie Brown comic strip. And Linus, one of the characters in the Charlie Brown comic strip, believed that there was a great pumpkin similar to the Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, and this was an ongoing theme in many of the Charlie Brown or Peanuts classic comics. So this is from 2010 in the Parade, the Sunday magazine that was sent out with lots of Sunday newspapers back in the day when people were still mostly reading newspapers. It's called Lessons from the Great Pumpkin. The true genius of the Great Pumpkin may be the way it sends up other holiday parables by having a character seek deeper meaning in the sole holiday that has no real lesson to teach. Is there any other day we celebrate that is as empty of moral or historical significance? Halloween exists today simply so that kids can dress up, run around after dark, eat too much candy, and scare the pants off one another. So that's all there is to Halloween, at least according to popular conceptions.
Damn.
All right. On Halloween, when the Festival of the Dead commenced, quote, the spirits of the dead wander more than at any other time of the year. This is a night when devils, witches, and other mischief-making beings are all abroad on their baleful midnight errands. This is a 19th century commentary on Halloween. And this is from the Encyclopedia Britannica, 1963 edition. I like to go back to some of the older encyclopedias sometime because they're not so politically correct. In its strictly religious aspect, this occasion is known as the Vigil of Hallowmass or All Saints' Day. November 1st, observed by the Roman Catholic and Anglican churches. In Great Britain, Ireland, and the United States, ancient Halloween folk customs persist alongside the ecclesiastical observance. The occasion shows clear connections with the religion of the Druids in pre-Christian Ireland and Scotland. The Celtic year ended on October 31st, the eve of Samhain, and was celebrated with both religious and agrarian rites. For the Druids, Samhain was both the end of summer and a festival of the dead. The spirits of the dead were believed to visit their kinsmen in search of warmth and good cheer as winter approached. It was also an occasion when fairies, witches, and goblins terrified the populace. Bonfires were lighted on hilltops on the eve of Samhain. The tendency to manipulate rather than to celebrate folk festivals such as Halloween is characteristic of the 20th century. It reflects the growing influence of a rational outlook on life and the loss of interest in imagination and fantasy. The secular character of contemporary culture is also reflected in public neglect of the religious significance of Halloween, as well as in progressive loss of its folk vitality. Children are least affected by this disenchantment, and consequently, the more important folk occasions tend to be dominated by the young. Now, this quote kind of was a foretaste of this growing influence of the rational outlook on life that we saw expressed to the previous quote, that essentially denied to Halloween any significance at all. And yet here it is. Anyone who takes even the most cursory look at it realizes that it has this connection with the 3-day religious festival of All Hallows Eve, All Saints, and All Souls Day. So let's go on here. Here's another old tradition. This is quoted from the history of Halloween that was on the History Channel maybe a decade ago or so. If you put your clothes on inside out and walk backwards on Halloween night, you will see a witch flying in the sky at midnight. People used to believe that witches were the devil. The Day of the Dead, a universal tradition. This is from the work of Robert Grant Halliburton, who was an interesting person, a scholar, a poet. Oh, what were his attainments? He was a researcher and wrote quite a bit. But anyways, let's see, this is what Wikipedia says about him. He was a Canadian lawyer and an anthropologist. He became famous after founding the Canada First organization that saw English Canadian society as the heirs of Aryan Northmen. So he was a bit of a racist, but that was normal back in those days. But he was a very extensive author who wrote numerous pamphlets, books. He gave addresses and papers in a variety of subjects, So anyways, we're going to be looking at one of the things that he did. This is from the New Materials for the History of Man, number 1, The Festival of the Dead. It was published in 1868. So having had rather unexpectedly to visit England in 1859, I thought it advisable to prepare a brief paper for the Society of Antiquaries of London, and accordingly selected customs connected with All Souls' Day as a subject. On outlining it in England, it was apparent that the coincidences in the observance of this festival by different nations were much more striking than I had supposed. A new and most startling fact was discovered when I came to read over the paper I had prepared. It was singular that the Festival of the Dead amongst the ancient Peruvians was celebrated on the same day as by the Spaniards. That is, on All Souls' Day, November 2nd. I had also considered this merely as a curious coincidence, but it was apparent on reading over the results of my investigations that the festival was generally observed in November south as well as north of the equator, a fact so remarkable that it was evident that whatever could be the cause, it must be something hitherto unknown. So, from 1859 until the present year, so this is 9 years later, all the leisure that could be spared from public and private engagements has been devoted to the inquiry. It was evident that the uniformity could not have been caused or been preserved by any calendar now known to us, and that the festival must originally have been regulated by some visible sign or mark that nature had supplied to our ancestors and the Peruvians. In European calendars, the last day of October and the first and second days of November are designated as the festivals of All Halloween, All Saints, and All Souls. Though they have hitherto never attracted any special attention and have not been supposed to have been connected with each other, they originally constituted but one commemoration of 3 days' duration, known amongst all nations as the Festival of the Dead or the Feast of the Ancestors. It is now, or was formerly, observed at or near the beginning of November by the Peruvians, the Hindus, the Pacific Islanders, the people of the Tonga Islands, the Australians, the ancient Peruvians, the ancient Egyptians, the northern nations of Europe, and continued for 3 days among the Japanese, the Hindus, the Australians, the ancient Romans, and the ancient Egyptians. The startling fact that this feast was celebrated among the ancient Peruvians at the same period and on the same day that Christians solemnize the commemoration of the dead at once drew my attention to the question: how was this uniformity in the time of observance preserved, not only in far distant quarters of the globe, but also through that vast lapse of time since the Indo-European first inherited this primeval festival from a common source?
Right.
In the most ancient calendar in India, the year commenced in the month of November, which bears the name Kartigui, which means the Pleiades, a constellation which must, by its rising or setting at that time, once have regulated the primitive year. We find also that in the month of October, the Hindus, like ourselves, have 3 days which are connected with the Festival of the Dead. In the ancient Egyptian calendar, the same resemblance can be traced between the name of the Pleiades, which among the Hebrews and Chaldeans is Athorai, with that of the Egyptian month of November, which is Hathor. The Arab name for the Pleiades, Ataria, also suggests a resemblance. And I will suggest here that these names for the Pleiades, which I think you're seeing now, Athorai, the Hebrews and the Chaldeans, Athor, Egyptian, and Ataria, Arabic. Now, if you look at the word Ataria here, what do you see here, T-A-U-R. Does that suggest anything? Does it? Yes, very good. Excellent. You get an attaboy for that. Halliburton goes on. Let us turn from the islands of the Pacific to Peru. And there we find the primitive calendar of 2 seasons marked by a New Year's festival of the dead occurring in November and celebrated at precisely the same time as in Europe and in Polynesia. The event in which it occurs, says Rivero, quotes, is called Ayamark, from Aya, a corpse, and Marca, carrying in arms, because they celebrated the solemn festival of the dead with tears, lugubrious songs, and plaintive music. It is worthy of remark that the feast was celebrated among the ancient Peruvians at the same period and on the same day that Christians solemnized the commemoration of the dead. Is it not somewhat startling to find that Australian savages at or near the time of Halloween, All Saints and All Souls also consecrate 3 days to the memory of the dead as a vernal New Year's celebration regulated by the time-honored Pleiades? And like the Northern Festival of the Dead beginning in the evening, or with a Halloween, in the Tonga Islands, which belong to the Fiji group, the festival of Anachi, a vernal first fruits celebration, and also a commemoration of the dead, takes place towards the end of October and commences at sunset. So here is a compilation of some of the partial list of ancient cultures observing a festival of the dead in late October, November. And you can see this down the left is the column of some of the, and this is not all inclusive either. But you'll be able to go over this on your own time and look at this. And here we go, another very important connection in all of this. A remarkable fact, however, was incidentally forced upon my attention, that the memory of the deluge was by the Mexicans, the Egyptians, and the Jews associated with the same time of the year and by the 2 latter nations as well as in Greece. And with that day I had found some very peculiar superstitions connected in the Pacific Islands as well as among most ancient nations. Among the Aztecs as well as the Egyptians, the deluge was commemorated at the beginning of the year of the Pleiades, when that constellation culminated at midnight. Now this is a very interesting connection, which brings us right back to something that the study of which I've been involved with for decades. And this is the myths and legends of the world-destroying floods, the cataclysmos of the ancient Greeks, the Noahide flood of the ancient Hebrews, the Christians and the Muslims. And so now here we have some interesting connections. That the flood is celebrated as having occurred at this time of year. The universal ancient tradition, the Day of the Dead, celebrated at this time of year. As Halliburton points out, there must have been some commonality amongst this, something to bring this coincidence in time together around some event, which he assumed was a natural event, and then he learned that the Pleiades rises and culminates at midnight. It rises essentially at sundown in late October, early November, and by midnight it's culminating, it's crossing the local meridian. So if you're in the northern hemisphere, if you're facing due south, you would look directly above, depending on how high would be, depending on your latitude, but let's say at 45 degrees up, where the plane of the ecliptic is, we see the constellation of the Pleiades, which traditionally is placed at the shoulder of the bull, the shoulder of Taurus, the bull. And I think that this is going back even to the days of the Egyptians. We know that Taurus the bull was a recognized, defined constellation as long as 16,000 years ago, because we see it depicted on the cave paintings, with the Pleiades very distinctly shown as a cluster of stars. We now turn to Mexico, and there we find that the great festival of the Mexican cycle was held on the 17th of November and was regulated by the Pleiades. It began at sunset, and at midnight, as that constellation approached the zenith, a human victim was offered up to avert the dread calamity which they believed impended over the human race. This belief was so remarkable that I cannot omit a reference to it here. They had a tradition that at that time the world had been previously destroyed, and they dreaded lest a similar catastrophe would, at the end of a cycle, annihilate the human race. Greswell has devoted several chapters and much learning to the 17th day of November to show how remarkable a landmark it has always been through a long lapse of centuries. Even among the Persians, the same day was peculiarly venerated. In the ancient Persian calendar, the 17th day of November was held so sacred that all favors asked of rulers were granted on that day. So now we have this second date that's kind of get thrown into the mix, which initially might seem to complicate things, but once we begin to dive deeper into the details, we'll begin to understand exactly why we have this thing associated with October 31st, November 1st, and the significance of November 17th. Even tradition has been unable to preserve the history of this day that must be sought for in the very earliest ages of the world. In the mysteries of Isis, the goddess of agriculture and of death, the funereal part of the ceremonies, the lamentations and search for Osiris, which commenced on the 17th and ended on the 19th. Among the Greeks, besides existing in other ceremonies, the primeval festival of the dead appears under a veil of mythology in all the ancient mysteries, but above all, in the greatest of them, the Eleusinian. But now, I'm going to show you something where I think you'll begin to see the interconnections here. So I want to call your attention first to the Taurids, which is the name of the meteor stream. Its cometary source, Comet Encke, and it peaks twice, once in late June and again in early November. Peaks from November 1st to November 3rd, approximately. And the radiant point of the Taurids is very near Pleiades in the shoulder of the bull. In fact, it's almost like a bullseye on the Pleiades. And so we have this correlation between one of the great meteor streams that has existed over thousands of years and a yearly festival that was part of both recognition of the ancestors and the Day of the Dead, and it's part of this constellation of the bull. Also, I want you to look just below the Taurids and you'll see the Leonids. So there you've got the bull and you've got the lion, two of the creatures depicted, one half of the four creatures that represent the apocalypse, shown on tympanums of cathedrals, shown in many different forms, many different places as the bull, the lion, the eagle, and the man. But notice the Leonids, cometary source, Temple Tuttle, and you notice the date that they peak. So we have two of the great meteor streams peaking, each with these two dates. I think this is significant. So in the Great Pyramid, its Secrets and Mysteries Revealed by Piazza Smythe, written in 1880, we find this. Now, hereupon, we may all well wonder how it came about that, according to the invaluable researches of Mr. Robert G. Halliburton of Halifax, Nova Scotia, that amongst the origins of almost all nations, and among many unaltered savage tribes still, such as the Australians, Fijians, Mexicans, and many others, people never reached by the Greeks or Romans. A similar beginning of the year to that described by Virgil is still perpetuated. The Pleiades, or the star group, chiefly characterizing for those nations the constellation of Taurus, being annually appealed to for that purpose. And I have a quote here from Virgil. Let me just jump back to that. If I pronounce this anywhere near the correct pronunciation, Candidas oratus apparet cum cornibus unum Taurus. The constellation of the white bull with the golden horns, which opens the year. And here we have the Pleiades. And in the next slide, we have a traditional depiction of Taurus the bull, with the Pleiades occupying the shoulder of the bull. And here's an example of Taurus the bull with the Pleiades, not quite on the shoulder, but this painting has been dated to 14,500 BC, which is basically 16,500 years ago.
Damn.
Now, how remarkable is it when you think about it that, at least in this one case, the same constellation, as in the same depiction of that constellation as a bull, has existed or persisted for that long. And then we will begin to find lots of bull symbolism. And here we are facing south at approximately midnight from the eastern United States over the evening of Halloween, October 31st, November 1st. We're facing due south, and look what you've got right there, standing right on the local meridian, is the Pleiades, the shoulder of the bull, which has risen at sunset from the east, culminates at midnight, and then sets in the west. And here you can see spring equinox. This is spring equinox on April 9th, 2300 BC. So 4,300 years ago. At the end of the age of Taurus, around the time of the Bronze Age collapse, this is what was going on in the sky. The spring equinox was transiting the Pleiades, the shoulder of the bull. Here's another depiction of the midnight sky on Halloween. Facing south from mid-latitudes, green line is local meridian. So sometime right around midnight, the Pleiades, moving from left to right, will transit the local meridian. Stansbury Hagar in 1931, he was an astronomer who was very interested in ancient traditions, ancient astronomical traditions. In the journal Popular Astronomy for August and September of 1931, he wrote an article called November Meteors in Maya and Mexican Tradition. Quote, before the arrival of the first Spaniards in Mexico over 400 years ago, and probably much earlier, in fact, I think I'm going to underline that for emphasis.
Damn.
The Mexicans told of certain stars called Zontamoc, or falling hairs, which fell from heaven to earth with the Lord of the Dead. Their fall was commemorated annually in the Cajoli festival, said to have been held towards the end of October. This festival and the falling of the stars was associated with the end of the world. The Lord of the Dead governed the Festival of the Dead preceding the Cajoli, during which the spirits of the dead were supposed to return to earth from the land of souls in the sky. No doubt they were believed to have been accompanied by their deity, whose fall is mentioned in the ritual. On sheet 8 of the Mexican Vaticanus 3773, and in the Borgian and other codices, these stars of the falling hairs are depicted falling from the sky to the earth, accompanied by many other stars, further identified by the conventional stars beside them. So, here's an example of Zantamach, the fallen god. Note the rattlesnake glyph in the lower right-hand corner. To the Mexicans, the ancient Mexicans, the rattlesnake glyph was a symbol for the Pleiades. Now, let's consider what we've got here. Notice the Lord of the Dead. He's falling to earth and he's accompanied by other falling stars. So I think right here now we've already begun to see very explicitly what this is leading us towards. Now, the rattlesnake, what is one of the characteristics of the rattlesnake? They can bite you, they can inject you with poison, they can kill you. But they usually give you warning, don't they? Yeah. The Vaticanus Codex antedates the entrance of the first Spaniards into Mexico and depicts traditions much older than that date. From these facts, it seems reasonably certain that the Zantamach were November meteors, whose falling hair referred to the fiery trails left behind them. But the Mexicans seem to have distinguished between the different meteor groups, for they refer to the fall of a Zantamach on the day 1 Eagle, which pertains to Taurus, and would seem, therefore, to refer to Taurid meteors. The end of the world would naturally be associated with the memory of one of the great meteoric showers during November, when all the stars seem to fall from the sky. Hagar continued, at Acansa, in the Yucatan, a Maya zodiac was placed on the stucco facade of a mound, probably long prior to the coming of the Spaniards. It was probably at least 600 years old when it was exhumed. On this zodiac, which represents the signs in regular sequence, the position of Taurus is occupied by 2 panels, the lower of which represents the rattle of a snake. It is Tzabek, the rattle asterism, our Pleiades. The upper panel contains a down-flying, semi-human or ape-like figure. Beside his tail are star symbols, and above his head spears or arrows, implements of war, which in the Cajoli festival represent the end of the world, marked by the fall of the Zantamach. This Maya figure also probably refers to a Taurid meteor emanating from Taurus in November, when that asterism is near the meridian. And so here we see the from that stucco facade, we see the diving monkey figure on the stucco relief. Here's the rattlesnake glyph. Up here, this is interesting because associated with this god falling to earth, this is the great urn being overturned and pouring out the waters of the flood onto the earth. And here is a Christian depiction of the same ideal, but in this case it's Lucifer, bound and falling. This is in Roslyn Chapel. And this opens up some other completely alternate meanings for the identity of Lucifer. Many depictions on cathedrals, medieval cathedrals, have diving figures. The skydiver from Autun Cathedral. Here we have from the Dresden Codex a torch-bearing dog or beast beneath a celestial dragon strip. 2 torches one pointing down towards the earth, flaming torches, I should point out. One, the flaming torch is directed towards the earth, the other it's directed towards the sky. And here we have ancient Roman traditions, Mithraeus, from the Mithraic traditions, and these were the two torch bearers that were always seen to accompany the god Mithras, and they always held each a torch, one pointed up towards the sky, the other one pointed down towards the earth. So let's talk a little bit about the Taurid meteor stream. We won't go into a lot of this. We'll skip over some of this. These are accounts of encounters with the Taurid meteor stream. I'll start with some work by astronomer Fred Whipple, published in 1948. It was the first photographic meteor studies, and this was, he focused on the Taurid shower. This was published in the Proceedings of the American Philosophical Society, 1940. The present paper is a study of 14 meteors photographed at the northern stations of the Harvard Observatory. 13 photographed in 1937 and one in 1938. The meteors all belong to or are associated with the Taurid shower. The total interval of the shower, as covered by the present observations, is from October 26th to November 22nd, nearly a month. Now this is because the stream itself is very diffuse, which is a characteristic of old meteor streams because stuff gets spread out. But still it peaks those 3 days, late October and early November. But for the Earth to entirely cross the whole stream, it goes all the way up to the 22nd of November. This unusual persistence of the Taurid shower, coupled with the slow daily motion of the radiant, has led Knopf and Hofmeister to conclude that the shower orbits are hyperbolic about the Sun. But the present observations show that the orbits are closed and of short period. There have previously been few data concerning the variation of meteor orbits with position within a stream. Because the Taurid shower provides such data, the observations are discussed in some detail, and the stream identified in origin with Encke's comet. Now, here's the significance of what Whipple discovered. Was he essentially took photographic studies of these meteors as they're moving forward through their orbits, which, as he says here, the original view was that they were hyperbolic. Now, hyperbolic means that it's open-ended. So if it's open-ended, that means meteors are coming in, going out, and they're not returning. The significance of Whipple's work showed, as he says here, let me go forward to this one. As he says here, the present observations show that the orbits are closed and of short period. In other words, they're not hyperbolic, they're elliptical. So elliptical means short period, they're going to be coming back regularly. And in fact, it works out to be about a little bit more than 3 years. Now, what he did was once you take these photographs, the meteors are tracing out the geometric path of the ellipse. So you can now take these 14 meteors, and if you have enough positions as they're moving forward in the sky, you can now play it in reverse, right? Each meteor is within this stream but has a slightly distinct orbit from the other meteors. But when you play them in reverse, what happens is those meteors all converge on the same point in space, which tells you that they're fragmentations of an object that was once a single object. Further, if you trace that back, it converges on the same point in space occupied by Comet Encke, which tells you, oh, this was byproduct of the disintegration of a disintegration event involving Comet Encke. Let's look at the next graphic here. This shows a radiant point in space. There's two things to appreciate here. the meteors are actually coming in parallel lines like you see in the graphic below. But when you look at them from our perspective, you don't see parallel lines. They all seem to be emanating from a point. Just think about, you've ever walked down a railroad track or anything where you've had that kind of perspective, or a downtown street where the buildings seem to be converging in the distance. You know that they're not really converging, they're parallel. The perspective, the convergence is an illusion of perspective. And so you can imagine almost like when the Earth is passing through a meteor stream, it's almost like the planet is passing through a tunnel. And the meteors, which ultimately emanated from the disintegration of some parent or progenitor comet, are flying along in more or less parallel lines. We're passing through, and as we look upstream, what we see is this radiant point, the point from which the meteors appear to be emanating in space.
I get it.
The meteors of the Taurid stream are not actually coming from the Pleiades. It's an illusion of perspective, but it's a very natural way to associate that point in space where the meteors appear to be emanating with the particular star groupings that fall, that are in line with that point. Does that make sense? Good.
Yeah.
Okay. And here's an actual time-lapse photograph of the Leonid meteor shower looking towards the radiant. And so you can see here, if you were to take these meteors and draw them back, you would see that they all converge on this point here that's very close to the star Regulus, which is in the constellation of Leo. And this event peaks on November 17th. So here we have, so here we have a graphic. And this graphic shows the orbit of two Taurid meteors. Now, these two particular meteors sort of lie on the outside range of the stream. They're like near the shoreline of the stream. So what you can get by tracking the orbits of these two Taurid meteors is more or less the region in space that's occupied by the stream. So if we look at this graphic, you'll notice here the sun at the center, and then you'll see Mercury, and you'll see the Earth right here, and then you'll see, that's Venus. Here's Mercury, the inner circle, then Venus, then the Earth, and then we have Mars. And so what you can see here with the meteor stream is that the meteors are moving this way, the way of the arrows. So the arrows are showing the orbits of the planets in that direction. It's like as if we're looking from above down on the solar system. The Taurid stream is also moving more or less in the same direction. Now you see these lines here extending from its most distal point from its orbit around the sun, which is called the aphelion, and its closest point called the perihelion. And you can see that the meteors would be coming in this way, past perihelion right here, and then continue back out like this, almost to the orbit of Jupiter. And then they begin to fall back, towards the sun, and they're doing this about every 3 to 3.5 years, right in here. So now let's go to the next slide, and I've kind of shown some more additional detail. So here's Earth's orbit. Now what you can see from this is Earth is crossing the stream twice, right? One time as it's coming from around the sun, and again as it's coming in towards the sun. So at this point, at this crossing, the meteors are going to be difficult to see. The reason? Well, because they're coming from the direction of the sun. So you'd almost have to be looking into the sun to see them, right? Now, this happens June 30th. Now, before we come around, you know a significant event that happened on June 30th?
What?
You've heard of Tunguska. A meteorite came in and blew up in the Siberian atmosphere about 5 miles above the ground. And it happened on June 30th. And guess what? The direction it came from? Well, it was not seen until the last minute because it appeared to be coming directly from the sun. And in fact, some of the eyewitnesses who first saw it commented things like, said it looked like it was being born out of the sun or disgorged from the sun.
Damn.
So the Tunguska event of 1908 that blew up in the Siberian atmosphere 5 miles above the ground with the force of a 15 to 20 megaton hydrogen bomb utterly devastated about 820 square miles of old-growth taiga forest, completely scorched and incinerated about 200 square miles of that same forest directly under the epicenter, left scars that were still there 20 years later that were finally discovered and investigated by scientists. Given the timing and the placement, both being consistent with that object being a member of the torrid stream. In other words, the summertime torrids were at the peak of the summertime torrids, crossing that stream, and it's coming directly out of the sky from that point in space where the stream would be emanating. Now, we come on around, Earth is moving this way through its orbit. This is in June, so now you're going through the summer, you come around, you're into the fall, and here we are at November 1st. And now, if you happen to look up the stream on that day, you're looking in the direction of this green arrow directly towards the Pleiades. You begin to get to see the geometry here of how this works.
Damn.
So now we get to the work of Victor Klube and Bill Napier, The Cosmic Winter, published in 1990. As noted, very few comets present any danger to the Earth, but the occasional giant comet that is trapped in an Earth-crossing orbit of short period rapidly develops in such a manner as to intermittently generate a substantial swarm of bodies, which are commonly asteroidal. The giant comets recur at intervals of about 100,000 years during a shower, whilst the terrestrial encounters with the asteroidal swarms, which may continue for a century or two, recur at intervals of about a millennium. Between the 3rd and 15th of November each year, the Earth runs through a meteor stream coming from a small area in the constellation of Taurus the Bull. A young stream made up of meteors not long released from their parent comet would be narrow and probably strong, and the Earth would pass through it in half a day or so. The Geminid meteor stream is one such, the Earth encountering it on the 10th of December each year and the shower being over by the 12th of December. The Taurid meteor stream, on the other hand, takes the Earth 12 days to cross, and it is not very intense. It looks old. It has two main branches, northern and southern, emerging from slightly different parts of the constellations, the branches being about equal intensity. Orbiting with the Taurid meteor stream is a small comet, discovered in 1818 by Pons. An orbit was calculated for this comet by Johann Encke, a pupil of the famous mathematician Gauss, who had developed a method for calculating the orbits of bodies from their movement across the sky. There are about 100 known short periods of comets. All of these, with the sole exception of Encke's comet, are in orbits which sooner or later lead to a close encounter with Jupiter and ejection from the solar system by the powerful gravitational pull of that planet. But Encke's comet has somehow established itself in a stable orbit, such that it never comes within the Jovian sphere of influence. It does, however, come close to Earth. In addition, there may be 1,000 or 2,000 asteroids over a kilometer across in orbits which make them a potential collision hazard with the Earth. None is more than about 10 kilometers across, their surfaces extremely dark, and fewer than 50 have been discovered. They are known as Apollo asteroids, after the prototype discovered in 1932. Encke's comet is in fact the sole example of an active comet in an Apollo orbit. The orbit is highly elongated, and the comet may approach to within 0.34 astronomical units of the Sun and go out to 4.1 astronomical units. The comet's orbit is inclined at only 12 degrees to that of the Earth's. This low inclination and the shortness of the orbital period ensure that there is frequent interaction between the Earth and the material of the torrid stream, and the potential for occasional, very close encounters with Encke's comet. On the face of it, then, the torrids seem to be an elderly, diffuse meteor stream with no peculiar characteristics other than their association with a comet in an unusual orbit and just too faint to be seen with the naked eye. There is much more to the torrid stream, however, than this. In a study of fireball records from the 1st to the 15th centuries AD, the astronomers Astapovich and Taranteva found that the fireball flux from the torrids was much more intense 1,000 years ago. The Soviet astronomers found the torrids were the most powerful shower of the year in the 11th century, with 42 fireballs belonging to them, and no shower, not even the great ones, could be compared with them as to activity. In the not-too-distant past, therefore, the torrids were revealing themselves as outstanding performers in the night sky. Two recent discoveries confirm the suspicion that the stream is a remarkable one. The first of these is that amongst the 80 or so known Apollos, 6 or 7 are orbiting within the torrid meteor stream. There are some interesting objects. Hephaestus, for example, is the largest known Apollo asteroid, being about 10 kilometers in diameter. Its orbit closely resembles that of the comets. Then there is Old Giotto, a dark asteroid about 1.5 kilometers across. Now, it is very unlikely that these bodies are the only ones orbiting within the torrid meteors. Discovery of the Apollo asteroids as a whole is only about 5% complete. We are therefore led to the remarkable conclusion that there are between 1 and 200 asteroids of more than a kilometer diameter orbiting within the torrid meteor stream. It seems clear that we are looking at debris from the breakup of an extremely large object. From Meteorite Falls in June, 2 sets of observations which appeared in the Journal of Geophysical Research in 1996, and this is from the abstract. 2 types of meteoritic events are associated with the calendric period June 13th through 30th. One is an excess of falls of certain basaltic meteors. These comprise a new subgrouping of achondrites, whose lithologies suggest possibly similar pre-terrestrial histories. Historical high-energy impact-like events on the Earth and the Moon have also occurred in late June. In addition to the much-studied events in 1178, 1908, the Tunguska event, and 1975, these include an impact-like lunar event known to Islamic scholars, whose occurrence in 617 AD may have been June 26th or 27th. So, is this starting to make sense? You see how these, yeah. So we have the evidence. I'm going to stop share for a minute. But we're seeing now, I'm trying to show you 2 parallel lines of knowledge. One, coming from these traditions from all over the world, this idea of the Day of the Dead and association of that day with the peaking of the Pleiades at midnight. Well, obviously, if in times past you're going to see the most spectacular light show associated with that particular meteor stream, it's going to be at night, at midnight, when it's prominently up in the sky. And what we're seeing here, and the idea goes back, if this stream is actually very old, which it appears to be ultimately from an object which entered the inner solar system maybe as long as 25,000 years ago. and then began to undergo this hierarchy of disintegration events. And one of these byproducts of one of these disintegration events is Comet Encke. So anyways, now we have an astronomical tradition associated showing that this Taurid stream is possibly very, very significant in historical terms. And we already know that it's almost certainly the origin of the Tunguska event of 1908, which, was only 150 or so feet in diameter. Well, now we have learned that from these astronomical studies that there may be 100 or 150 objects that are a kilometer in diameter. Do you know what a kilometer in diameter, how many Tunguskas that could yield? Let's see. So a kilometer is 3,280 feet. So if I divide that by 2 to get the radius, that's 1,640. Now if I cube that and time it 1.3333, I get 588,111, 588,111,163. So I get of human salvation 5 feet, y to the x 3 times 1.333 equals this. Divide by 588,111,163. And so that means that an object a kilometer in diameter could produce over 1,000 Tunguska type objects if it fragmented. I'm going to double check that calculation, but it certainly does give you an idea that 1,000, that'd be like 1,000 hydrogen bombs going off, and that would be globally devastating. Would not cause a mass extinction of humans. It could cause certainly regional, if not hemispheric, mass extinctions. The most likely means of human salvation would be if we could temporarily get off the planet for a while until the dust settled and then come back again. Okay, this is from Wikipedia. The Taurids are an annual meteor shower associated with the comet Encke. They are named after the constellation Taurus, where they are seen to come from the sky. Because of their occurrence in late October and early November, they are also called Halloween fireballs. Encke and the Taurids are believed to be remnants of a much larger comet, which has disintegrated over the past 20 to 30,000 years, breaking into several pieces and releasing material by normal cometary activity or perhaps occasionally by close encounters with the gravitational field of Earth or other planets. In total, this stream of matter is the largest in the inner solar system. Due to the stream's size, the Earth takes several weeks to pass through it, causing an extended period of meteor activity compared with the much smaller periods of activity in other showers. And let's see here. So I'm going to go back to the share screen, go down here and show you another. Go through all the Tunguska material.
Got it. Let's go.
Which could be a whole separate treatment in and of itself, actually. And that's something we can perhaps talk about. Okay, so here you see various Earth-approaching comets. This is me standing looking south. Sun is coming up on June 30th, coming up in the east. And then you see the Beta Taurids right there. Z is the position in the space from which the Tunguska object appeared to strike the Earth's atmosphere. So you can see it's very close, actually, to the very point in space that would make it, consistent with a Taurid meteor. So let's go on here. For some reason, when I transferred to this was originally in a Hebrew font, so I've got to go back and correct that. So here we have the Mithraic tradition.
There we go.
Now, we've got Mithras here. He's accompanied by 7 stars. Those 7 stars traditionally represent the Pleiades. you'll notice what he's doing. He's turning and he's looking back towards the sun god, but what he's really looking at is the raven, or in some cases an eagle, who is considered to be the messenger of the gods. There are two torchbearers. There was a reconstruction of this that was done, and it was mistaken because one of the torchbearers was supposed to be holding his torch pointing towards the sky and one towards the ground. But notice what Mithras is doing. He's stabbing the bull in his shoulder, and blood, fluid, but presumably blood, is flowing forth from the shoulder. Now there's a whole lot going on in this bas-relief here, way beyond what we would talk about in this context.
There we go.
But here's Europa being abducted by Zeus in the form of a white bull. You notice the torchbearer here also. Note Mithraic elements. This is from a wall painting found in Rome. The important thing here, notice she's about to stab the bull in the shoulder, Europa. Here is a chariot with steeds. This represents Phaeton's chariot. You remember the myth of Phaeton?
Damn.
Phaeton was the son of Helios. Okay, so what you need to do, and you can do this on your own, this is a homework assignment. Look up the myth of Phaeton, Phaeton. And Bullfinch's mythology has a real good account of Phaeton. But very briefly, Phaeton was the son of Helios, the sun god, and he was able to persuade his father to let him drive the chariot of the sun. But the chariot of the sun, he was not able to control it because of the power of the great steeds pulling it, and they veered off the road, which was the pathway of the sun, through the signs of the zodiac along the ecliptic, and the chariot began to descend to earth, and it set the earth on fire. So in this particular painting, they're showing the Phaeton chariot. He's holding something in his hand here, which I interpret to be the bowline. And then down here, what's happening here? You got Poseidon. He's overturning the urn, and the waters of the great flood are spilling out on the earth. So in this particular painting, each of these events is being associated. The abduction of Europa, the stabbing of the bull in the shoulder, the torchbearer, the Phaeton myth, and then the Great Deluge. So then, a quote from Sir Henry Howorth, 1887, The Mammoth and the Flood. The Peruvians had several flood stories. One of them refers to a flood accompanied by an eclipse of the sun lasting 5 days. All living things were destroyed except a shepherd and his family, etc. Some time before he had noticed that his flock of llamas looked sad and seemed to be studying the stars. On inquiring from them, they pointed to 6 stars close together and declared that they were a sign that the world would shortly be destroyed by a deluge. He thereupon collected his llamas and his children and took them to the summit of the mountain Ancasmarca, to where a crowd of other animals had already sought safety. Scarcely had they reached the summit when the sea broke its bounds and rushed over the land. The Eve of the Deluge. This painting is very interesting, and it makes some wonder about some of these artists and where they got their inspiration from. This is the Eve of the Deluge, of course, the Great Flood, right? And these are the antediluvian patriarchs here. Reclining back is Methuselah, and one of the patriarchs, probably Enoch, is pointing to the omen in the sky, which is the Great Comet. And that the appearance of this great comet in the sky is indicative of the impending flood that's about to destroy the world. And then I get a little bit into this, which is kind of a segue off the Burkle Crater event. Then let's see. Okay, let's look at that. So we'll skip through what I think is.
All three share one common heritage, the heritage of disillusionment. All three appeared at a critical time in the life of the people of the region where they flourished. All three are marked deeply and profoundly with the prevailing sense of insecurity. Therefore, we have some understanding of the psychology of that time. Neoplatonism, or the New Platonism, claims its original inspiration and descent from the writings of Plato and his legitimate successors and disciples. Let us then pause for a moment and consider the relationship of philosophy to Greek life. To a very great degree, philosophy had divided Greek life very strongly. Step by step, it had overthrown the power of Greek religion. The Greek was more impressed by the value of his philosophy than by the importance of the state religion. Part of this was due to such magnificent dialogues as those attributed to Socrates. Part was due to the natural instinct of philosophy in comparison to the elaborate pageantry of theology. The philosophers were mostly modest, moderate human beings. They did not believe in ostentation. They had very little time or consideration for elaborate rituals and rites, nor were they much addicted to the prevailing superstitions of their times. And although these men lived and flourished in the great golden era of paganism, sometimes called the Age of Pericles, as individuals and collectively, they never accepted or subscribed to the prevailing state theologies. They were discreet, they were respectful for the most part, sometimes not entirely so. But they felt that these systems of state religion were themselves becoming gradually encrusted with superstitions and were falling inevitably into the hands of privileged classes to be used as ways and means to further enslave and dominate the individual, restrict his liberty and freedom and his right to think. Thus, the philosophical systems of Greece, whether they be the doctrines of Plato and Aristotle, or the more rationalistic concepts of the Stoa, all of these emphasized a reasonable, rational, natural world. Even when the deities are introduced, these deities are introduced in a rather matter-of-fact manner. They are not introduced with great solemnity, but they are accepted, interpreted, and organized and arranged to become part of a very natural, proper kind of world. A world in which, for the Greek, there was very little emphasis upon what we would term today mysticism. It is true that the Orphics were mystics, but by the time Orphic doctrine had passed through Pythagoras and Plato, very largely its mystical content had been redirected into fields of philosophy. The Greeks considered the human being and his salvation a very serious business. They considered it something that would call upon the greatest resources of the individual and the greatest learning possible to man. They had no concept of an easy salvation. They had no concept of an individual praying his way into grace. To them, to live well was hard work, demanding tremendous strength of character, dedication, and resolution. And it was further part of their belief that the salvation of man depended upon the growth, development, and release of his own intelligence. That the individual could not subdue himself into a state of spirituality. He must unfold, extend, richen and strengthen all the aspects of his character. The Greek philosophers also turned against the patrician system of their time. They had very little time or consideration for the power of wealth, family traditions, hereditary authority. Like Confucius, they held the individual to be the important equation. Not where he came from, not where he went, not what he had, not what he lost, but what he was. And their entire philosophy was built upon the problem of improving and increasing the content of man. And